All right, welcome to the latest Hate Week edition of the Land of 10 Iowa Facebook Live session. It's Minnesota week, wrong M team in the Big Ten. So rivalry time, Floyd of Rosedale, which apparently Bo Bauer wants a live one.
Yeah, he wants a live pig. There hasn't been one for this series since 1935. The last time when Minnesota won it, a bunch of people sent in telegrams to the governor saying that the pig should be butchered for a hog roast for the team that won the game, the Mighty Gophers. So I don't know that that's going to be the case here. Can you imagine animal groups in Iowa or Minnesota?
I don't think they'd like it, but if it happened, we would have a Facebook Live of it at Land of 10 for everybody who wanted to see the butchering happen live and in person. So it's probably for the best that it doesn't happen, but I found it really, really funny that he brought that up today, simply because in a spot where, Iowa's, things have gone bad for this team, and then this is what they're talking about. So at least they still have a sense of humor with everything.
Exactly. I think the players are more relaxed than everybody else associated with this program, from the fans to the media.
Yeah. So as always, if you have questions, feel free to ask them, pop them in, as we have with the title for this. How does Iowa fix its football season? Mike, sorry, I don't think they're firing Kirk. I don't think that's happening anytime soon.
Not happening.
So you're just going to have to kind of get used to it. Or I guess I would think you would be at this point, as we're approaching 20 years with him being there. Eugene says he's looking for a wide open, crazy game on Saturday. What do you think, Scott?
Could happen. That's what happened 2 years ago. It was 40-35, and it was wide open and crazy. And LaShawn Daniels, I think, ran for 195 yards and 3 or 4 touchdowns. It was a wild game, and Beathard had some really great plays. But hey, I'm game. I'll take a fun game.
I'm always up for crazy, and no sport gets crazier than college football, especially when it involves night games or anything. So bring it on. As long as it's not like a 3-2 wild, crazy game, I'm all for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Jared just says just win. Yeah. So I think Chamberlain L. Davis is probably beneficial at this point for Iowa more than anything else.
Right. Jake says if the offense stays the same, does Iowa even score against Ohio State? Yeah, I think they do. Well, I don't know how much, but I think they score.
Jumping straight over Minnesota, it's the idea with the number 6 team in the rankings. The offense, it all comes down to the offensive line. It's amazing we're saying that as we're on the verge of entering November with this team, when you looked and thought that with Akram Wadley would be the strength of this unit with everybody they had coming back. But, they suffer injuries to their 2 starting offensive tackles that are coming back, and that was really the one spot in this line they could least afford to lose anyone, let alone both people, because there was no experience there. Lyric Jackson gets thrown in right away, the redshirt freshman who's had his moments, but I would say the Northwestern game, you're not going to find a lot of highlights to put on his season tape from the film of that game. And now with Boone out too, you have Tristan Wirfs coming in as the true freshman, and so it's kind of the same boat. He's still learning day by day here, considering he's been only on a college campus for a few months now. So what became a strength hasn't been it. And even where they return all their starting guys, they can't run the ball inside. They didn't do a good job of it at Northwestern. And, Northwestern wasn't Michigan State. It wasn't Penn State, a team that had a really good rush defense that you thought struggling in the run game would be an issue there. Northwestern was coming in like top 50. It was all right, but it wasn't great. If Iowa had a good running attack, they should have been able to run the ball there. And until they get that going, I don't think you're going to find anything different with the offense. When the run game gets going, the rest of the offense will probably get going with it.
Yeah, and that's why I wrote today. I said I think they need to really focus more on Stanley and make Stanley the guy, and go pass first, run second, because it's just not working. And I'm not suggesting that. I like the premise of Iowa football to be a run first. I think it works for the state, what you can recruit, how you can play it, but I just don't think it's working now. Having those 2 tackles out was such a much bigger loss than what people would have thought. It's just not plug and play. And I think Alaric Jackson, I think Tristan Wirfs will both be NFL caliber players, but they're replacing NFL caliber players, and Boone and Ike Bucker, and they're just not running the ball very effectively, and that's with a really good running back. And so I think right now they've got to do something there. But I think people are really angry now more so than I've ever really seen, and it's a little perplexing to me. Northwestern was the favorite team. Iowa was on the road, didn't have its best player on defense. The defense played really well, but still, you kind of knew this was going to happen this year. And I know it's been a lot of seasons stacked up, and people have kind of taken the cumulative effect to it. But they won 28 games, or I guess been 20 games in 15, 16 combined, and they're 4-3, so they got a winning record. They beat a ranked team earlier this year, who's ranked now. Almost beat Penn State, who's number 2 in the country, one play. So I guess I'm a little perplexed that people are just wanting to burn Kinnick and everything to the ground right now.
You lose the game you don't think you should, and it doesn't go well. That Northwestern one, that was toss-up 50-50 game, and even without Josie, even without Brandon Snyder, make a really good argument that they should have been in position to win that game. They get no points out of those first 2 drives, where they get pretty deep in Northwestern territory. You only get 10 points. The defense plays better, I think, than anybody expected, especially without, arguably the 2 biggest leaders. Yeah. And then, so everything's there for it. They just didn't get enough points to get through. Whether it was touched on that final drive to get it or a big play somewhere else, there just wasn't enough of what they needed on offense. And it wasn't like they needed a lot. It wasn't a game where you said, well, yeah, they scored 28, but they would have had to have 35 to win. Then you go, okay, that went from being a good day to a great offensive day. They just needed any kind of offensive day, and it really, really, wasn't there.
Yeah, I was going to say, first half, I thought the play calling was really good. I thought that they kept Northwestern on its toes. They varied it. They varied the groupings, the formation, the plays, and it was really effective. Second half was just like back in time, and it was first downs. They had 7 first down runs for a total of 1 yard. And I'm like, what are you doing? You're banging your head against the wall here. It's not working, so don't do it. Well, it's kind of this mentality in some ways of, we do it, and we're going to do it, and we're going to do it, and it's kind of Chris Doyle, German army, and in some ways it's like, guys, that's not the way it works today. Tomorrow it might work, but not today.
Part of me says they were going to be hamstrung anyway. Until that last series in the second half, nothing lasted more than 5 plays. So whatever you were doing wasn't working. So I think that's part of it, is they just couldn't move the ball. But part of it was they did a good job early on, especially in those first 2 series, of attacking Northwestern on the perimeter, especially on some shorter passes. And I know the play-by-play guys, when I rewatched the game, said that was something Brian Ferentz thought that they could kind of attack. They did a good job early with that, and then they didn't go back to it much in the second half. But at the same time, when you're only having like 3 plays or 4 plays in a drive, you don't have a chance to go to much of anything. Right. So it's a little bit of both there. But I think they should have probably, at least on 1 or 2 of those drives, made it more of an effort to maybe not just go ground and pound into a wall for 1 yard, and maybe see if you could have had something going with the passing game, or gone. I know I wrote in the film review about them going 22, 2 tight ends and 2 guys in the backfield, running. It didn't work for them. They had success passing with it. Maybe on a first down play action fake with that, because it worked throwing to the tight end twice. Maybe you open up with that to try to do something different to get the offense going. But really, that's about it for all I would say, is what they could have maybe done different when nothing's working. It's 3 and out, 3 and out, 5 and out. Yeah. There's nothing you can do at that point. Yeah. Steve says, hey, guys. Hey, Steve, and also to your next comment, Josie being back will help, but the O-line has to be healthy now. Yeah. Josie's good. They did well without him. Ben Neiman had a good game. Kevin Ward plug and played pretty well filling in for Neiman. When you don't notice the guys who were starting in place of the injured guy for the mistakes end, you don't see it playing out. Oh, he was out of position. That was a bad play. I think you can call that a pretty good day for those guys. So that was a good thing for everybody playing out of position, with the exception of Bo Bauer at linebacker. So I think you'd say that was good. The same thing with Jake at safety. That was a good spot. Now, for the offensive line, it depends on what your definition of healthy is, because I don't know if you're going to get Boone Myers back. I think you got to kind of come to the realization that you're playing a true freshman and a redshirt freshman and offensive tackle the rest of the way, and you have to expect that to be the case until we get told Boone can play. Kirk said today that anything with Boone related, they'll probably have a better idea later in the week on. But it sounded like today that they're not really optimistic But who knows, that may change by Saturday. But it just seems like that ankle in the foot is just a bigger issue than I think anybody thought it would have been when word first kind of spread of the injury early in camp.
And I wonder if it's something like what Ricky Stancy dealt with when back in 2009, which was a severe high ankle sprain where you could have surgery to help heal it, or you can let it rest. And in that case, they had surgery. But in this case, it seems like with Boone that they just, let's see if it gets better on its own, and eventually it gets to the point where you can make it work. And it's really unfortunate because he's probably their best drive blocker, and they could really have used that in the running game every play. The ones he started, he just didn't look effective. He didn't look the way he normally does, and that's really unfortunate. And then you also got Ike Butker, who hasn't played all year other than the first game.
Yeah, he lost him early on.
And he was a really good drive blocker. So the weirdest part is of the season, and I think that people have the hardest time accepting, is you had a really good core of an offensive line returning. And then everybody thought, okay, they're going to be able to run the football effectively, and then the quarterback will catch up and the passing game will be okay. Well, passing game is actually better than what I thought it was. The running game is nowhere near what I thought it was.
No, and I think the first sign that Boone's injury was worse than people expected was when they were playing him at guard. Mm-hmm. The fact that it maybe took 3 or 4 games for that to come around probably would have been the expectation there. But the fact he had to go through the bye, having missed the game beforehand, and he's still not ready, it's just the one thing that couldn't have happened on the offensive line is anything happened to the tackles, and it hit both of them. And so, that sometimes you end up, when you roll the dice, you end up losing everything on it, and you got to pass it off to the next guy. Yeah. There's some snake eyes popping up. So that's kind of what happened with the O-line, especially at tackle this year. Lance says Iowa needs to win this game to be bowl eligible. There's some tough games ahead. What do we ahead? What do you think? Who do you think they can beat? Well, Lance, you should go read the column I just posted probably about 25 minutes ago at Land of 10. Kind of goes on this exact subject. I don't call Michigan a must-win yet because I still – Minnesota. I've done that all day with Michigan and Minnesota.
Minnesota.
Yeah. But to get back, they can still get 6 wins without it. Purdue and Nebraska, they'll be favored for, and they could win. But if you want this season to be anything more than labeled as an underachievement, I think you need to win this game. They're sitting at 4-3 right now. They're residing in, kind of a neighborhood. They don't want to at 4-3. They would, prefer to be 6-2, 5-1 probably with the way everything is gone. And if you lose this one, then all of a sudden that's 4 out of 5. And you think things are bad now, then wait till what would happen after you lose the first home game to Minnesota. There, I got that one right. To the Golden Gophers for the first time since '99. The way things are with the fan base will be twice as bad coming out of it. And then you come up with what comes next, which is 2 top 10 teams in Ohio State and Wisconsin. We were talking earlier today. Ohio State might be the best team in the country. They're ranked number 6, but they've played really good football since they lost to Oklahoma early in the season. The game with Penn State this week, I think, will go a long way to kind of let you know what sits there. And Wisconsin looks like a really good team. Their schedule hasn't been great, so you don't have all these teams to say they've been tested. But, that's another really great team. It's going to take a Michigan-esque effort from last year to knock off either one of those 2 teams. And so if you lose this one, all of a sudden things go into a real big tailspin, and your conversation becomes, can they get bowl eligible, which is where Lance is at right now with this team. I think you can still easily get 7 wins, but you have to win this one, which became, I think, more of a 50-50 contest, coin flip, kind of like that Northwestern game last week, than most people probably expected it would have been in the summer or even 7 weeks ago.
I've seen it a couple of different times, and I hate always referencing the past, but since it's the same coach and the same system for the last 50 years, it feels like that it's easy to draw on that. And last year, Iowa was 5-4 after getting destroyed 41-14 at Penn State. And I think the thought was, this team can't even beat Illinois. This team's going to lose to Penn State. It's going to lose, Michigan. It's going to lose to Nebraska. It's going to be 5-7 or 6-6, and nobody's going to go to a bowl game. They don't deserve to go to a bowl game. And then likewise, I saw the same thing in 2008 when they lost to Illinois 27-24, and they had Penn State, who was ranked number 3 at home. They won that, beat Purdue, and then rolled the mighty Gophers 55-0. So I look at it this way. I mean, I'm kind of into the college football season. The bowls matter to me for the major bowls and the playoff. beat the Gophers. They're your oldest rival. You have the greatest trophy in my opinion, the greatest traveling trophy in college football.
And Bo Bauer's the second greatest.
Yeah.
It's not live.
Sorry, live pig. Oink oink. I think beat them. Make this your bowl game for the week. Have fun with it. This is a great rivalry with a lot of great moments. I'm going to write about the 2002 game where you all tore down the goalposts in the Metrodome. There was an 82, so I guess you back that up 35 years ago when Hayden decided to change clothes right before the post-game press conference and got in a flannel, overalls, in a straw hat because the Minnesota writers were calling him a farmer. So you have so many great things with this rivalry. Enjoy the heck out of it, and they're gonna, if they're gonna win, I think they will. Enjoy it. The season ends too fast. It's going to end in 6 weeks, and then you're going to go, what about next year? No, enjoy it now.
Yeah, enjoy it. I don't think they've been enjoying it the last few days.
No.
I think they'll need a win to get to that point. Travis wants to know if Iowa will ever get rid of Hayden's offensive playbook. I didn't know Hayden ran the shotgun zone spread. He was more innovative than I ever figured. I knew the whole tight end stand-up thing was different, but I didn't know he was running that offense back in the 80s because that's kind of been interjected this year at Brian Ferentz.
Yeah, it was a little more innovative. The stand-up tight end was so he could see over the line, but that's when they were playing 52.
As somebody who played tight end, you don't need to see.
I know.
That was what I played in high school. No.
Kirk scrapped it.
Rightfully so.
Yeah.
That'll cause some probably comments in here, but it's a waste of space to have that guy standing up. But no, the offense, it all goes back to being a run-first team, and they do it. It can do it in different ways. Not so much recently with the lack of success with it, but they're still going to be Iowa and try to run the ball. So that's a head coach thing. It's an OC thing. He believes it too, and it was also a Hayden thing. So I think that's the only part of the lineage that's the same, is they want to run the ball and kind of maul you a little bit, and that's kind of who they are. And it plays to the kind of player they can easily bring here with the offensive lineman they can either recruit to Iowa, whether it's an in-state kid, a walk-on they can develop, or the kind of player who may be like a 4-star caliber. I'm thinking of Brian Balaga, who's from out of state, who will want to come here simply because it's known as an offensive line factory. So you kind of have to play into that.
And then there's another issue that Iowa's had that doesn't get enough attention, and I know I've written about it, I think you have too, a little bit, but their retention and the retention of players and wide receivers in particular has been pathetic. You look at, they didn't recruit worth a damn under Bobby Kennedy at that position. They only have 3 wide receivers who are on scholarship between the 13 to 16 classes.
You have to try to be that bad. People
I know. 3 out of 10 are still here. Matt Vandenberg, bless his heart, he's trying. He's running good routes, not quite as fast as he used to be. Adrian Falconer, and who I imagine will transfer. Devontae Young, who probably should be more on the field than he is. A pretty better athlete. I can't imagine he'll stick around either. But it's just like you guys, you got to retain these guys. You got to build them up and coach them up. They didn't do any of that. I mean, that's why they have a new wide receivers coach. The younger ones are good, though.
Yeah,
I think they're going to be good. They just got to make sure to keep them, and I think they will.
Yeah, the wide receivers is the biggest indictment you can make on this. What I would say would be the old offensive coaching staff, because it was all done under them, whether it was in identifying the right – whatever. There's about 7 reasons I could go wrong. Identifying the wrong players, you bring in the right players, you don't develop them. Your playbook doesn't match the players, or if you want to say they need to learn it, well, is it too complex for anyone to be able to learn within 2 years, let alone to be able to do right away? So you have all these reasons on why it didn't work. You have to find a way to make it work with these batch of guys. Now, the early returns are positive. This looks like the guys they brought in from this last class in 17 have the ability to kind of get Iowa out of this rut. Now it's kind of like this game with Minnesota this week. I don't care if you have running game issues, if you have injuries, whatever. You have to go win this if you're Iowa. It's kind of the same thing with these wide receivers. You have to find a way to make it work with these guys because it's been wrong for so long. These guys can not only kind of start changing that conversation and narrative, but you need it to happen because of what's happened. You have no scholarship, players who are upperclassmen. You only have 3 of them on the roster. And these guys who are young, who are the freshmen, are going to have to fill this void for a couple of years because you're going to go through a couple classes where there's either a guy who's not on the roster who was there, or somebody who just left because it didn't work out for various reasons. So they're going to need Brandon Smith. They're going to need Amir Smith-Marset. They're going to need Max Cooper. They're going to need everybody in that class to come through and at least be contributors for them. And they look to have the ability to do it. They just have to find a way to be able to maximize it now going forward. I
think they've recruited better this class. I mean, I know you met Henry Marquez, who's redshirting. Neither one of us got a chance to see Amir before he came here, but I did Brandon Smith and Max Cooper, super kids, great character, and I think they fit. Where it was before, they were going to Texas, they were going to Florida and grabbing guys who were the fourth and fifth tier wide receiver in that state, and they came up here and then they didn't understand why they weren't playing. I mean, I remember Emmanuel Agwu, speedster. He didn't make the top 5 in camp a year ago, and then he quits to go run track. Now he's at TCU running track, and it's like, by midseason he would have had his chance, but he wasn't patient enough because he's not from around here. So I think, now that Brandon Smith's not either Amir Smith-Marset, but I think there's they can see what they want to be at, here. So I think there's some pluses in the future.
Yeah. So much of this offense is young, inexperienced people, and it became more so with the injuries, that parts of the season was a rebuilding thing to begin with, and it just kind of became more because your first-year quarterback, so you're always going to have that. Outside of Matt, any wide receiver you played is either inexperienced or it's their first year playing Division I football, including Nick Easley.
Right.
So there's some learning curve stuff there. Then you throw in the 2 tackles now, and all of a sudden you're talking about a good large chunk of your offense being part of this. And so that's just one side of the ball. And you knew the offense was going to be the question mark for the most part. And so, helping, tight ends are the same way, especially now they've gone with the 2 kids with TJ and Noah there. So part of this year is just there's a learning curve that's got to come along with all of it. And it'll be interesting to see if they can pick it up a little bit faster in these final 5 games and kind of start putting more of it together, not just having it show up just randomly for one play or like one half like you kind of saw at the end of the Iowa State game.
Right. Rob says have to pass to run, can't run against 8-9 in the box, have to get Wadley involved with short passes, let him run, use the tight end more. Stanley has to hit open receivers down the field. Coaches are calling the right plays. Kids have to execute, and they're not. I would say for the most part you're right on with that. I mean, I think that they have to go the other route right now for the rest of the season, and then once their offensive line settled enough next year, you can go back to kind of run first mentality. But get Wadley in space. Trying to run inside zone with Wadley when there is 8 or 9 in the box is not beneficial for him. You want him out on the perimeter. You want him on the edge. You want to get him involved in space. So his one play can determine the game. He's done it a lot. Use the tight ends more. These are really good tight ends for as young as they are.
Yeah.
They've had some really good ones over the years, and these guys are right up there with them all. Stanley hitting open receivers. He needs to do a better job of that, but he's doing a good job.
He did better this past week on that. He had 2 completions, and he had a deep ball go right to T.J. Hawkinson that went off his hands. So not too much more he could do on that. Yeah,
and then the coaches. The one thing I will object to is the second half. I thought early in the downs they were really poor. I thought the inside calls, first down runs, right up the middle. 7 runs on first down, 1 total yard. In the second half, that'll kill you. You just won't, then you're always playing from behind.
Yeah, the 8-9 in the box, I wrote on that in the film room this week. They had only 5 rushing plays that went for 5 yards or more. Let that sink in for a minute before we move on anywhere else. That was all they had, just total for the game. But I went and looked at them, and virtually it was 6 guys in the box for most of them. There was one they did with 8 that was a 22-yard gain. But virtually everything else was when 6 guys were in the box. And so I think if you're Brian Ferentz, you got to find a way to scheme it up where you have 6, 7 guys in the box when you want to run the ball. That means less 22. It might mean a little less 21. Not always was there 8 guys in the box on 21 in recent weeks, but they will put them in there. But basically, unless you're in short yardage, I don't know if you bring out the fullback in that spot anymore. Just because when teams see that, the immediate response is 8 guys in the box. Penn State did it. They did that against virtually anything Iowa did. Michigan State did it. You have Northwestern doing it here. Any team that's halfway decent with a run game or game planning or strategy will probably do that going forward, and you'll probably see some of those teams do it with 21 all the time. Northwestern didn't, but they didn't have to because they found some success with just 7 guys. So if you're Brian, you got to find ways to do that. Now, in his defense, they did do some things to try to do that during the game, and there were some plays where they just didn't execute on it, which kind of goes back to what Rob was saying on it, but they are trying that. I think if you want to see that Iowa is really trying to think outside of the box and be a little bit different with offense for these final games, they come out and pass to set up the run. I don't know if they'll do it or not, but I think that's what they can do. Those first 2 drives with Northwestern, the first one in particular, the first one they had about the first 4 plays were passes, and then they had like 3 straight runs. I think the second drive, they started off with some runs, but then they started working in passes. Use the pass game to set up the run a little bit. I think it'll help you out, and it'll open things up for Akron Wildly a little bit. They tried to get the tight ends more involved in the game this week, especially in the first half. The totals don't look like it, but they did call plays for what was there. So they were trying stuff, but it all didn't come together yet for them. France comes back with they need 2 games to get bowl eligible. Who do we think they can beat? They'll be favored with Purdue and Nebraska, and you've got the Minnesota win this week. So right there's 3. I think if you win 3, you can look at this as an on-par season for what people expected. I think anything less than 3 wins out of these remaining games is probably going to be viewed as underachieving, and that includes if you only get 2 and 1 with Wisconsin.
Right. I mean,
or Ohio State, but just either one of the top 10 teams.
One of the things that I think people need to remember is every single opponent but one Iowa's played has a winning record right now through 7 games. All 3 of their non-conference opponents have a winning record. You look at Wisconsin, their 3 non-conference teams were 9-14. I can't even remember who they've played. They played Northwestern, who I think is the only team with a winning record so far in the league. They beat Purdue. They beat Maryland. Anyway, in Indiana, something like that. So Iowa is getting measured against Iowa's schedule, and you look at 6-0 Penn State, 5-1 Michigan State. They're both ranked. Northwestern is a 50-50 game. And it went into overtime. They lost. So I don't know that. I think sometimes there's a standard there. I think this team could be competitive in 4. I think they have the potential to hang with Ohio State and probably not 4 quarters, but I think they should win this week. I think they should win the last 2. And, based on how they play against Ohio State, I could see them going to Madison and winning. The visiting team has won every year from 2009 on in that series. So why can't they go out and punch them in the mouth and win a 17-14 game, which, one team always seems to win?
They have to play better than they've shown in the last 4 weeks to be able to do that. And I think that's what you were alluding to. You have to see what they do with Ohio State, but for that to come and play, you can't have the offense you saw last week. If that shows up in Madison, that game's already over before it starts. So,
it'll be just like last year, 17-9 and yucky.
Yeah. So, David, with the comments so far of the entire Facebook Live session, hire Brady Hoke. I can't get behind this strongly enough. I think this is hilarious. You should definitely start taking this to social media. Go get shirts made up for that. That's really hilarious. I think that's really funny. Brady Hoke is definitely what's missing here.
Yeah, I think he was 1-2 versus Iowa, so I think he'd be quite a find here. He lost when he had a Sugar Bowl team, and he came here in 2013. They were up 21-7 at halftime, and then Tavon Smith, one of the more underutilized players in Iowa history, catches a pass and takes off and runs like 70 yards for a touchdown. Anthony Hitchens forces a fumble on Devin Gardner, and they win the game 24-21, 17 straight points against Brady Hoke.
Kent says, stop with the run, pass, punt offense. I think he's getting into the same thing you saw in the second half. A little bit there, a little bit. For Brian, that was probably the most predictable half you've probably seen out of him so far for this year. So if it took 7 games to get there, he's probably winning on that side. Andrew says, pass, love the concept, need to catch the ball. Stanley does his job. The receivers need to work on catching. Drops were an issue this past week. Off the top of my head, I know Easley had 3, Hawkinson had 1, and there's probably 1 or 2 I'm still missing. And
Wadley with 1, and so I think there was 5 or 6.
Right there's 5 just off the top of our head with stuff that happened. Nate's accuracy really wasn't the issue in this past game. It was, they didn't do great holding on to the ball, which might be part of the reason they went away from it and went to more predictable runs on first down. But, they got to catch it more. That just plain and simple on that going forward, especially with what's coming up. You can't really have any miscues once you start playing those top 10 teams. And whether it's, the first down runs go for less than 4 yards at the rate they're going at now, or they're dropping at the passes the rate they're going at now. That's got to improve.
If they can get 3 yards on first down, it'd be everybody stand up and cheer.
The Bronx cheer.
It'd be like Iowa when Hayden got hired, and he always uses that joke that they came out and everybody started running out. They did a shotgun or something like that, and everybody stood up and applauded him. And he's like, "What do they do if we haven't scored a touchdown here?" So, Hayden Fry. I'd applaud too if that's the case. Todd wants everybody to just be quiet about firing Kirk. They're not going to fire Kirk. You can be mad. I'd get that, but he's not going to get fired. He still has a winning record. This isn't Tennessee. Butch Jones.
Yeah, get the hire Butch Jones shirt too. That would be just as good as
Brady Hoke or Butch Jones.
Oh my God! I think as a media member, I would want Butch Jones because he would say something like "champions of life" every other press conference, and I would just lose it.
Yeah.
So there'd be some entertainment factor for me, but I don't think the fans would apprate that part as much as I would. So.
No, champions of life would get old pretty quick. Yeah. Everybody who lives here is a champion of life.
Yes, that's just for being a native Iowan. That's already what he would say. We've already got that press conference pretty much mapped out. Travis with another comment here says, "Will Stanley stop overthrowing guys, stop throwing behind them, and stop throwing 3-yard fastballs? He has no finesse. He does have a rocket arm. I think the overthrowing was not an issue with Northwestern. His deep ball. That was the best I thought it looked all season. He had one on the first drive to, I think it was Stanley. He had the one to Matt on the touchdown drive. And like we said earlier, he had Hawkinson, and Hawkinson diving with one hand just couldn't catch it. I don't think the fact of how fast he's throwing the ball is the reason those short passes were being dropped.
Yeah, I kind of wondered about that last pass that was dropped by Fant. But then again, he didn't take that. I asked him on Saturday, and he tried to backtrack and didn't want to answer it in any way, which tells me Stanley didn't think he threw it too hard, and Fant was not going to take that at all. I mean, he knows what he gets. He works with him every day. So that's, what was it, about a 7-yard pass?
Yeah.
So probably 15 yards in the air.
And that last pass to Fant, when you watch it on a replay, you can tell he kind of looks upfield before he looks in, that's a no-no. When guys do that, the odds of them dropping skyrocket. Yeah. So for that one, it was more so that than I think the speed of the ball. Yeah. I think people automatically look at the quarterback when it comes to incompletions and stuff like that. The overthrows make Stanley an easy target, and the fact that he throws a rocket stands out too with that stuff. But I don't think that was as big of an issue for this week as in some of the other ones. Eugene says he's sure people are upset because Kirk hired his son as the offensive coordinator. Funny you say that. Scott had us put up a poll today on would you like seeing Brian as the next OC? And the last we checked, it's been 50-50 all day. Or the next head coach, sorry. Yeah. It's been 50-50 all day. It's been pretty interesting to follow.
It's about 30% say yes, they want him as the next head coach, 30% no, and then the other 40% scattered or some sort of qualifier like, if they have a good couple of years or win a Big Ten title, that sort of thing. So, see, Mike says, Iowa's never going to be a football factory. That's not what the university or most fans and alumni want. Get to 7-8 wins a season, and everything is okie dokie in Iowa City, the St. Ann Arbor. It's not quite accurate that way. I understand that because I've been here long enough. I think that's kind of the baseline, and people will accept it as long as you have a good year every couple of years. Now, Iowa did 2 years ago. But I think the problem right now with this school, this athletics department, this football program is people aren't getting the end of the rainbow. There's no pot of gold. 5 straight bowl losses. Basketball team 2 years out of last 4.
Title game in football.
You have they're top 10 in basketball, and then you only go to the round of 32. Wrestling can't win a national title anymore. That you're like, what? Just once I want to have a happy ending, and there aren't any. Everybody gets killed at the end of the rainbow. So I think that's what Iowa needs is, even if they go to the Music City Bowl or the Pinstripe Bowl, beat somebody.
Yeah.
Okay, good. We feel good about ourselves. Move on and have 6 months of happiness. Because right now it's, oh my God, they got beat 30-3 by Florida. They got beat 115-16 against Stanford. Christian McCaffrey's still running. So I think that's part of it.
And I don't know if you mentioned the football factor or not, because I think that's the phrase I used when talking earlier. I was talking about the O-line there, and Iowa is viewed as a football factory when it comes to the offensive line. The NFL views them that way, and kids who come to Iowa kind of not necessarily get graded higher, but they know what they're getting there. They know the track record of guys here. So from that standpoint, they are, and I don't think you can really argue that. And his point on 7 to 8 wins, that's why I think this Minnesota game is one Iowa needs to win. That was the expectation level for this team this year, virtually across the board with where you went. 7 seemed to be about the average. Scott was a little high on it, on 8, and there were some other media members who were a little bit lower on 6, but the mean, the average, everybody comes at 7. If you're going to get 7, most likely, if you get the Minnesota game, 8's definitely in play. Without it, it becomes a whole lot harder. Mm-hmm. Mike's next comment says, Ferentz retires, Stoops in next year. Let me handle this one because I bet you this was going to happen. I put it at 9 to 5 odds. We'd end up getting something along this because we've seen a lot of comments about Stoops coming in some capacity for next year. Guys, just stop it. It's not going to happen, and you need to just move on and past it. I covered the Big 12 for almost a decade, and one of the worst-kept secrets in that league was that Bob Stoops was somebody who wasn't going to coach forever. No one saw him retiring when he did, but the fact that it happened this way didn't really surprise people who'd been around the league, knew him, and talked to him or anybody around there. He's not Bill Snyder. He wasn't a guy that was going to coach, until he's 80 or 78 or do all that on the sideline. I had people tell me when I was covering Iowa State that he was somebody who already had a house, a condo bought in Chicago. That's where he was going to retire to. And then when he retired, he bought the one that was either next to it or above it, so he can kind of have it make it twice the size. And in the long run, that's where him and his wife are going to live once his kids are done with school there. I don't see him as a guy coming back coaching in any way, shape, or form, whether it's Iowa, whether it's elsewhere, or anything else. So I would just don't go down that route. Don't pin your hopes there because the odds of it happening are like 0.001%.
Mm-hmm. Clay says use the freshman running backs. I think they do need to do that. I think they need to have Torrin Young more involved. I think he would have been better if they would have had him running more of the inside zone. Nothing against Akron, but he's more of a physical presence that can potentially break more tackles in the A gaps or the Bs, right behind the guards. And I like Ivory Kelly Martin too. He did fumble against Illinois, and that's something that's a no-no. It's hard to get. Akron Wadley was in the doghouse for a long, long time because of that.
Yeah, LaShawn Daniels was the one who had those inside zone runs for the most part last year. The majority of them, Torrin could handle some of that stuff, and I know they talk about wanting to limit Wadley's touches at 18 to 25. I think he went over that this week, which would be the second time he's gone over, and he's had 2 other weeks that have been right up there at the max on it for that. So giving Torrin a little bit of run is a way to go for that. A couple first or second downs, the ones where you want to run the ball, go for it. Inside, put him in for that series. You can bring Wadley in then later on in the series or on third down for his pass catching ability. But yeah, we both agree with you on that. We'd both be using them a little bit more than they currently are, but for some reason they're not. And I said it last week, I don't think they're going to change on that. They're in a spot where they're going to do everything they can to kind of win now, and throwing Wadley out there is the way to do it. They're not throwing the kids out. And I think that's the way they're going to roll until they show us that they're going to do something different. So,
there's a lot of things we talk about, speculate about that we know aren't going to happen. But, one of the things that
has to set up the run.
Yeah, exactly. We've seen it a couple of times. You saw it even once or twice last year. Akram in the slot, Torrin Young in the backfield. Sometimes fake the jet sweep. You don't have to run it every time you run the motion. I mean, Jonathan Parker did a great job with that 3 years ago, and then it didn't ever work again. And sometimes you can do that, or sometimes run Akram out of the flat. Sometimes do lots of different things. Get Akram in space. That's where he's effective. And if you can consistently pass the ball, then you can use a lighter running back to run between the tackles. But until then, you're banging your head against the wall. And that's what Iowa did in the second half. That's the worst half I've seen Brian Ferentz call all year.
Yeah. Carey says, obviously you need to get more consistency offensively and a lot less predictable. You won't be saying they're predictable once the offense starts moving the ball. I think that's all kind of tied together there. Eugene says, Kirk is 2-9 coming off bye weeks on the road. I wish I knew that before I picked Iowa in our Friday prediction thing. I wish I also knew Josie wasn't playing.
Yeah. Right. Well, they are 8-9 overall, coming off buys on the road, or coming off buys. Kirk is now all of those games except for the Penn State one, at least in the last century, because one of them was in 1999. All of those games have been pretty competitive, but the Penn State one was terrible. But again, one-score game. Somebody doesn't jump off sides on fourth down, maybe they score a touchdown and they win.
Yeah. And Randy, again, drops by the receivers were brutal. I think most everybody watching this agrees with that. Mike says Kirk is stuck in 1954. If he was stuck in 54, I don't think you would have seen even as many passes as you did last week. But
he was conceived in 54, but he was born in 55.
Bruce, give the younger players a chance. Running back, we agree with you. That's going on there, and you're starting to see the wide receivers, the young kids, play a little bit more. So I think that'll continue over the back half of the season. Mary says Beto issue at home, that would be huge. Yeah, that'd be the equivalent of Michigan from last year. And then we got Eugene saying teams adjust better at the half. And then we also have Scott saying Big Ten teams have adjusted their style. Kirk uses the same thing from 20 years ago. ESPN even said Northwestern coaches, so they know exactly what I was calling for a play. They do with Iowa, but also people have known what Iowa was going to call for a play since basically the fifth game of the Ferentz era, because it's Iowa, it's what they're doing. And a lot of the time they found ways to make it work. That complaint doesn't come up when the offense rolls for 180 yards rushing or for 200 yards rushing. It comes up when they get stuck now. So, that happens, but they've had success with it. And the biggest issue, I think, with the predictability with the offense was more so with Greg Davis, where you knew it was coming based more so off the formation than anything else, and that's kind of gone this year. So, Iowa's going to run the ball. They want to run two tight ends and just kill you that way. They've done less 22 this year. I think they've done less 21 than in years past. I don't have the numbers to back that up, but just from watching the film with Brian, it seems like they're doing that a little bit less than the years past. So it's the same basic concept that they're doing, and teams know it's coming, but for 19 years it's worked more often than it hasn't. So I don't think that's necessarily the biggest issue for Iowa, but it's the fact that they just can't do what they want to when they line up in almost anything. And I'm not even just talking about two tight end sets.
If Iowa's lineman could whip the guy across from him, it's not an issue. Because, the ball's running to the right. Can you beat the guy in front of you? If you can, then you stop the play. If you can't, you're done. But the problem is Iowa can't run the football, so people can predict what they're doing. They get there and they win that fight. That's the biggest problem. But predictability is it didn't work, so they're predictable. That's kind of the way a lot of people think. So I think it's, of course Northwestern knows what Iowa's going to run. Iowa knows what Northwestern's going to run. Kirk said the same thing last week because they have the same staffs.
The coaches have been there for over a decade on each side. They could probably call – this would be a fun game to play, is you give them a down and a distance and see what they think the other team is going to call and how correctly they would be on it. Because I think those two teams would be hitting like 80% on each other.
Invent some sort of coaching Madden.
Yeah, and they would know it. They would hit it.
See what happens, yeah. Well, it reminded me. I think I was sitting there in midway through the third quarter, and I was thinking, this is like almost every single Iowa Northwestern game I've ever seen, except the years in 14 and 15, which was blowout. Every other year was just like this, where it's Iowa gets ahead, Northwestern comes back, and then it's all of a sudden it's pins and needles the rest of the way. And even in like 2013, it was an overtime game, 17-10, Iowa won.
Yeah.
At home. So it's crazy. So Bruce doesn't have faith.
Hot take alert coming here.
Won't win another game.
Scorching.
Well,
scorching.
I don't know if you want to be right about that.
I don't think he's watched Nebraska at all this year.
Right.
But Nebraska, Purdue just lost to Rutgers, so we'll leave that out there too. So, and they're favored with Minnesota. So there's 3 games they'll be favored in that you see them losing. So if you think that's the case, go bet your farm against them, and you'll end up making a good chunk of money.
Right.
I don't think that'll be the case, but we'll see what happens. That's just a fan who needs a win.
Yeah.
I think a win and a hug probably.
Yeah, right. I mean, I understand the frustration right now, but the negative attitude sometimes doesn't help either. It's one thing to have that knee-jerk reaction after the game, but the players move on after 24 hours, and again, you only got one more month of this, and then you're going to be waiting for a bowl game, and then after that, it's going to be like, what do they look like, and how good are they, and what's the the spring game, when's the spring scrimmage in Des Moines, and all this stuff, and it's like, man, you got to enjoy the season while it's here, even if it's not up to expectations. This is the one season that people have the most angst about. The NFL, hey, you know what? You lose, it sucks. But, if you're at least 10-6, you usually get to the playoffs, except for the Bears a few years ago. Baseball, if you win, you got all season. And even in college basketball, if you finish 6th in the Big Ten, you're still in the big dance.
Yeah.
You win 20 games and you're 20-11. You go to the big dance. College football, you go 8-4. It's the worst freaking season of your life. And if they're 4-3 and 7 games in, fire everybody. Even a guy who's in the top 6 in coaching wins in Big Ten history. So, Eugene, can you chip with a back to help the O-line? In a perfect world, yes, but in Iowa's world, no. They don't block that way.
Yeah, that about sums of the. Also, that with Wadley, you want to use him more in the passing game too. Yeah. So there is a trade-off with that. Mm-hmm. Even though if we were designing the scheme and you have him block a little bit more, I don't know how often you leave him in because that's the guy you want skirting out. That big touchdown against Iowa State he was out of the backfield, just skirted out as this kind of safety. You don't have that play on that option on the plays that you keep him in there. So there is kind of a give and take component on that. I don't know how much of that being the reason I was not doing it, but if I was putting the playbook together, that would be a reason on why there would be a lot of times where I wouldn't do it, simply because of how unique he is. So,
all right, looks like we're finishing up. So
yeah, we're through with all the questions. So if you have a final one, I'll put it in there right now. We'll get to it. Otherwise, Scott, anything else you want to hit on before we?
No, but I think we're excited though. I know I am. I always like Minnesota, Iowa. Who hates Iowa? We hate Iowa chant. You won't hear that at Kinnick. Iowa hasn't lost at Kinnick to the Gophers since '99. That's 7 straight wins. So the place will burn to the ground if the Gophers do win.
Rivalry weeks are always fun.
And he'll come on up with a boat.
Yeah.
Row it, baby.
Yeah, and be sure tomorrow Scott's got the story on the goalpost and how Iowa fans took it down. Kudos to everyone who was there who did that, because that is one of the most wildest stories I've ever heard, because I've never seen anything else like that before. So on the road, and you do it, I just shake my head and kind of have to laugh at it. So Scott has that coming up. I'll have coming up later in the week. Can Iowa turn its season around? I'm going to take a deeper dive onto that, looking at the issues with this team and how some past Iowa teams have or haven't done it with some of the similar issues. And I think you'll be interested to find there's one team in recent memory that basically is almost a mirror clone to this one, and you won't have to search too far back to find them. So be sure to keep an eye out for all that stuff coming up later in the week. So thanks, everybody, for all your questions. We had a blast with this. Hope everybody did too.
All right. Sounds good.
All right.
See you on Saturday.
See you on Saturday, everybody.